Imagine owning $500 million worth of art, and then, exactly 81 minutes later, it's long gone, stolen by cunning thieves. That's what happened at the Gardner Museum back in 1990. The art has never resurfaced, and the perpetrators remain at large. Nearly 30 years later, it's still touted as one of the most devastating thefts of private art in America and worldwide. Recently, however, the FBI has solved the infamous crime and finally revealed the names of the criminals. So who are they? How did they do it? And what exactly did they steal? All right, let's find out a little bit about this infamous museum then. In the late 1800s, esteemed art collector Isabella Stewart Gardner, that's this lady, put together this fine gallery, eventually opening it to the public in 1903. Over the years, Isabella's collection grew, even until her final day in 1924. Little did she know, however, that her treasures would fall victim to one of the most enthralling crime mysteries of the modern era. Following Isabella's passing, she left the museum with a whopping $3.6 million to play with, under one strict rule, that none of the precious items were to be sold nor anything added. She wanted to keep her collection just the way it was, and until 1990, that remained mostly the case. Then, along came two men who would tear up the museum's heart, carrying out the largest private property theft in American history. At the time, the thieves stole 13 masterpieces worth a cumulative $200 million. In today's dollars, some art dealers suggest the haul could be worth up to $600 million. Now that's no chump change. Before we get into the actual heist, let's talk about the importance of what happened, or rather what did not happen, in the years leading up. In 1982, 8 years before the heist, the FBI caught wind of a plan to rob the museum. With this knowledge, they were one step ahead, and the museum was able to spend money on 60 new infrared motion detectors, more security guards, and a CCTV system. Only on the outside, however, not the inside walls, because the Board of Trustees deemed it too expensive. This meant that while the exterior was under surveillance, the inside was still vulnerable. Fast forward to 1988. Improvements in security were going up at other museums around Boston, and an independent security consultant recommended improvements for the Gardner Museum. However, money was tight, so it was left untouched. Now time for the cunning heist. It was around midnight on March 18, 1990, when a Dodge Daytona pulled up to the side of the entrance of the Gardner Museum. Curiously, the two men waited almost an entire hour before getting out of the car. Dressed in fake police uniforms, the men simply pushed the museum buzzer. "We're responding to a disturbance call," they said. And in breaking protocol, the museum night watchman on duty, Richard Abbott, let them in. The robbers placed Abbott under fake arrest before handcuffing him and a second security guard and throwing them into the museum's basement. At this point, there was nothing security could do. The thieves had penetrated the perimeter and the robbery was underway. In less than 90 minutes, the thieves snapped up 13 near-priceless works of art, headlined by Rembrandt's only copy of The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, valued in excess of $100 million according to MSN. Alongside that was The Concert by Vermeer, valued at up to $300 million according to telegraph.co.uk. 5 drawings by Degas, Flink's Landscape with Obelisk, Chez Tortoni by Manet, an ancient Chinese gu, bought originally by Gardner in 1922 for $17,500, and 2 more Rembrandts. They also tried to unscrew a Napoleonic flag from the wall, but failed, so they took the French imperial eagle ornament on top instead. After 2 trips to the car, the thieves drove into the night, leaving the Gardner Museum in their dust. Shockingly, the real police took until 8:15 a.m. the next morning to arrive on the scene and release the tied-up guards. So that covers what they took. But what was their method? And how come they weren't noticed by any of the infrared motion detectors? Well, they actually were. In the Dutch room on the 2nd floor, one of the detectors was triggered at precisely 1:48 a.m., 13 minutes after they'd finished tying up the guards. This suggests they were waiting to make sure no authorities had been alerted. After everything remained quiet, they got to business. As they approached 2 Rembrandt paintings, a device that beeps when someone is too close started to go off. The thieves' solution? Smash the device so it stopped beeping. Problem solved. With a blade, they cut around the outskirts of the canvases to remove the paintings from their casings, leaving the empty frames behind on the floor. The thieves then moved through the museum, causing careful havoc in the short gallery and the blue room. You might be thinking, how did they get away with it if the motion detectors did indeed spot them? And what about the CCTV recordings? The answer is easy. On their way out, they ducked into the security director's office, took the video cassettes that recorded their entrance, and the data printouts from the motion detecting equipment as well. As soon as authorities realized what had happened and the absurd value of the items stolen, it was all hands on deck. The FBI quickly put together a list of suspects, but ultimately, it was too long and didn't bring in the real perpetrators. At first, the FBI believed that Rick Abbott, the security guard, could have been involved in the plan. After looking into it thoroughly, the official FBI word was that the guards on duty were too incompetent and foolish to have pulled off the crime. Ouch. Another name that warranted interest was James Whitey Bulger, one of the most powerful crime bosses in Boston. He had the history and personality to mastermind a plan of this caliber. As the leader of the Winter Hill Gang, which governed the turf on which the museum stood, Whitey actually sent out his own agents to investigate. Why? Because he wanted to pay tribute to the diabolical thieves. Of course, this led to plenty of police questioning. Brian McDevitt, a Boston con man, was the other name of concern. He'd previously tried to rob the Hyde collection in Glen Falls, New York, dressed up as a FedEx driver, so the similarities between the two crimes were obvious. Alas, he was proven innocent. His fingerprints didn't match any on the scene. Fast forward to 2014, where Special Agent Jeff Kelly, the lead FBI investigator on the Gardner Heist cold case, put forward some new names, none of which could be explicitly tied to the crime. But these names, like mob boss Carmelo Merlino, did shed light. Then in 2018, the FBI announced that they'd found their men, finally after 28 long years. But they wouldn't release the names. Not until just now. According to the FBI, their names are George Reisfelder and Lenny DiMuzio. Both living out in Boston, these men belonged to the crew of the local criminal Carmelo Merlino. They'd been on the suspect list for years, but the evidence hadn't been enough. Until now. We have to go back to 2006, where a prison inmate named Robert Beauchamp wrote a letter to Anthony Amore, the director of security at the museum, claiming that his former cellmate, George Reisfelder, had admitted his part in the crime back in 1990. That was the first key step. Next was finding out the involvement of Merlino. As it turns out, he was the mastermind behind the operation, while Reisfelder and DiMuzio were simply the pawns. While neither of these men are living anymore, at least the FBI can finally close the case on who did it. Although they're still scratching their heads trying to figure out where the artwork is. Any chance you've seen these paintings? If you have, the museum is offering a reward of $10 million for information